there wasn't a Blunt Man and Chronic movie, then those fuckers wouldn't be saying shit about Jay and Silent Bob, right?
They're not saying anything about you now, okay? They're talking about fictional characters. Fictional characters. Am I getting through to you at all?
So all we gotta do is go stop the fucking movie from getting made.
Yeah, and forego the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you two would be entitled to in the process. What are you, fucking retarded? I don't think I'm alone in the world in imagining this flick may be the worst idea since Greedo shooting first. You know, a Jay and Silent Bob movie? Who would pay to see that?
Shortly after Dogma was released, writer and filmmaker Kevin Smith announced that he was going to make one more entry in his then 4-movie anthology, The New Jersey Chronicles. As I've stated in earlier reviews, Smith's Viewsk universe, made up of Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, and Dogma, chronicles stories that seem to take place in the same universe. The characters are generally different, although actors and sometimes even minor references to a preceding film will pop up in some shape or form in another movie. Smith's first 3 movies, known at that time as the New Jersey Trilogy, told stories about failing relationships and how the characters tried to resolve the problem by hanging out at convenience stores, malls, or the suburbs of Jersey. There were often discussions dealing with pop culture, and they seemed to hit home, striking a chord with a lot of younger moviegoers. Even the critically panned Mallrats had a lot of heart, and people focused more on Smith's sharp dialogue rather than his simplistic directing style. Dogma was Smith's first fantasy film, and it dealt with the woman's crisis of faith, until God herself charges her with a holy crusade. It had all the marks of a Kevin Smith film, and was generally received well by fans and critics. However, its take on Catholicism isolated people like me who don't have a lot of insight into the whole Jesus thing. Nevertheless, it's a funny film, more clever than it looks, and remains one of a kind. That brings us to Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, which would be as much of a send-off to Smith's 2 chuckle-headed drug dealers as Friday the 13th the final chapter was to the Jason franchise. At a budget of $20 million, it would be the biggest film Smith directed at the time, and would tie together events from all the past New Jersey films.
Wow, look at these morose motherfuckers right here. Smells like somebody shit in their cereal. Bung!
For starters, this was the first movie to my recollection that had a debut trailer on the net.
What the fuck is the internet?
Smith did this to appeal to his mainstream fans first, most of whom thought that the film was simply a joke and would never happen. It was an interesting notion because at that time you couldn't swear in a movie trailer. Today, you have red band movie trailers, which can only be shown in front of an R-rated movie, but back then this was rare. Regardless, it was proof of how serious Smith was in making the movie, and got a lot of fanboys revved up. The bulk of the story has Jay and Silent Bob traveling to Hollywood to stop Miramax from making a film based on them. Well, actually, it's not a movie based on them, but based off of characters based on them. And this is the part of the video where I start pointing out references to past Smith films. In Chasing Amy, the characters Holden McNeil and Banky Edwards were finding success with their new comic book, Blunt Man and Chronic, which as we find out is a comic book based loosely off of Jay and Silent Bob. At the beginning of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, Jay and Bob find out that Holden sold the rights of the comic to Banky, who then sold the rights to Miramax to start production. How did they find out about the movie? They visit our friend Brody, the comic book-loving, sex-organ-obsessing hero from Mallrats, who inquires about the money they're supposed to be making but haven't yet seen. Now, Brody is played by Jason Lee, who's appeared in just about every Kevin Smith film with the exception of Clerks. In the comic book store, he wears the same wardrobe we saw him in Mallrats, but Jason Lee also plays Banky in the movie, who appears at the end. That's right, Jason Lee also played Banky in Chasing Amy, so here he is playing a dual role. This is great for Kevin Smith fans, but for those who aren't aware of the Viewsk universe, and I'm sure there are a couple who aren't, they'll be confused. And before they visit Brody, who, according to Mallrats, should actually be hosting The Tonight Show and not hanging out at a comic book store, we see Jay and Bob chilling out in front of their favorite convenience store, the Quick Stop, where we get a quick cameo from Randall and Dante. There are a couple of small connections here. At the end of Dogma, Jay actually recommends to Silent Bob that they go visit the Quick Stop, so this movie had to take place literally moments after Dogma ended. But also, the two kids make references to Randall and Dante's marriage to each other at the Presbyterian Church. This is a slightly more obscure reference that goes back to the Clerks animated series, but it's interesting to note that in this instance, Smith is including the series as part of the official canon. On their way to Hollywood, Jay and Silent Bob stop at the local movies, which appeared in Dogma, although I don't know if it's the same exact location or not, where he meets Justice, an international jewel thief who becomes the object of Jay's affection. And then they steal a monkey. This is where the movie exceeds Mallrats in the goofy, forced humor department. But speaking of Mallrats, remember the end where Jay and Bob walk off with Suzanne the orangutan? And yes, her name in this movie is Suzanne, so we're assuming that Mallrats was somehow predicting the events of this film. And speaking of monkeys, Jay and Bob also befriended a monkey in the Clerks cartoon. What's with these guys and their monkeys?
Now there's a concept I can't get enough of, a man and his monkey.
Along the way, they also meet Carrie Fisher, playing a conservative nun, which I guess makes for the ultimate Star Wars reference, George Carlin playing a gay hitchhiker, and the cast of Scooby-Doo. Interestingly enough, this movie came out just before the live-action Scooby-Doo movie hit theaters, so this might have been the first time we've seen the characters go live-action.
Right, Ray, and right with Rock.
And when they finally get to Hollywood, they run into Ben Affleck and Matt Damon playing themselves as they're filming Good Will Hunting 2.
Applesauce, bitch.
And they also run into Wes Craven directing Shannon Doherty in a Scream movie. Okay, there are a lot of unnecessary references here. Shannon, although playing herself in the scene, played Renee in Mallrats, making her cameo a little pointless. The Wes Craven reference is a little funny because in Scream 3, which he directed, Jay and Silent Bob make a small cameo, the very cameo that got me into the Smith films to begin with. And then Jay and Silent Bob finally get into the set of the Blunt Man and Chronic movie, which is being directed by a racist film director played by Chris Rock.
Do you know that I came up with the idea for Sesame Street? I came up with it before PBS. The white man stole it. That's right. I was gonna call it NWP, Niggas with Puppets. Catchy, ain't it?
And who should make a surprise appearance than none other than Mark Hamill, the ultimate Star Wars... Wait a minute. Even though they don't share screen time together, this is the only movie Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher have been in together, to my knowledge, since Return of the Jedi. And that's pretty cool.
Don't fuck with the Jedi Master, son.
I think George Lucas gonna sue somebody.
I'm not going into the full detail of the story because, honestly, there's not much to work with. This is the first Kevin Smith film that I feel doesn't have much to say, and as a send-off to a beloved series of films, that was quite a letdown. I know there are a lot of people who love this movie, but as for me, I've always been more of a Chasing Amy guy. I'm actually divided as to how I take this movie. Obviously, the Kevin Smith fan in me loves the throwbacks to the past movies.
Nights like this, I miss dating a lesbian.
His films have a quality of self-ownership to them. Even though they have huge followings, watching one for the first time made it feel like you were part of an exclusive group. And only that exclusive group would get all the references that this movie offers.
Chasing Amy? That'd never work as a movie.
I don't think Smith left a stone unturned. The other half of me was let down by the countless sight gags, the bad comic acting from Will Ferrell, the thin plot, and just the fact that the whole movie revolves around characters that until now were only supporting characters. Imagine a whole feature-length film about C-3PO and R2-D2. Yeah, it might have a certain appeal, but what would be the point? The other thing is just how mainstream the movie feels. I know that sounds inconsistent, with all the View Askew references I just mentioned, but if you look at a comedy like Road Trip or American Pie, it really tries to capture that type of audience.
I am the master of the clit.
And you don't want to rub the clit the wrong way.
There's nothing wrong with that, and as a matter of fact, I admit that that might have been the smarter thing to do, given the film's budget. I also have to admit that the Kevin Smith fan in me also wins. Slightly. I like some of the more cartoonish gags, the joke about the drug dealer's union card, and as much of a Star Wars fan as I am, the blunt saber battle was a lot of fun. I don't think I like it as much as Mallrats, but I can't deny its humor. I think the main problem I had with the film initially was that it was the one movie that was going to end the New Jersey Chronicles, and that would have been like The Phantom Menace closing the Star Wars movies. And I liked The Phantom Menace, but Return of the Jedi was a far better movie. That should give you a clue as to how much I praise next week's Kevin Smith movie, Clerks 2, wrapping up my reviews of the View Askew universe.